But for it to be such a new industry and the way we grew in 2020 and 2021 just was not sustainable. The numbers that we were seeing, the hiring that was going on, the ad spend that was being spent, what was taking place as an industry just wasn't sustainable. It's another episode of the Podcast Trapper with your host, myself, Anna Agogo, founder of Black Pod Collective, Black Pod Festival, and Adode Media. And this week, I want to talk to you guys or really discuss what's going on in the podcast industry. So right now there's an industry shakeup, and quite frankly, I'm not really surprised by it. Everybody is talking about it being due to the recession and everything that's kind of going on right now. And if I'm being honest, I'm a little nervous. And here's the thing. I think we have to think about this from independent creatives of how does this trickle down to impact us? And as you guys know, I have multiple brands, so it impacts me in a very different way than it might the typical independent creator. So let's dive into what this shakeup is if you haven't heard about it. First and foremost, if you don't know, we kind of are in a recession. I think we've been fighting the urge to say that this is what this is, but the economy and everything at large has been kind of going down this path. Now, the reason for that and everything else in between, let's not get into. But at the end of the day, it's expected to impact all industries. So with that in mind, we have things such as, Google, Amazon, all of these different corporations and the tech industry that are having massive layoffs. And it's only right to expect that this would impact podcasting as well. Whether we realize it or not, podcasting is much of a media industry as well as a tech industry because of all of the things that go into it. So for those who don't know, we've had some layoffs, and for something such a new industry, and really if you've been in it for a while, it's not necessarily new, but it's new in its own way in that it's becoming and gaining popularity. Around the time of COVID, and I shouldn't say around because COVID hasn't necessarily left yet, but when things were booming, like stuff was popping, everybody was starting a podcast in the pandemic. So we saw huge surges in 2020 and 2021, so much so that so many companies and organizations invested into podcasting in ways that we hadn't seen before. And I think it's kind of coming back to bite us. Some of that growth was to be expected because people didn't have other things to do. Now that outside is open and we back outside and everything else in between, I think it's changed the landscape. It's changed how people tune into podcasts. It's changed how companies spend money on ads. So this has a trickle-down effect because whether you know this or not, a lot of these companies, how they make their money is through ad spend. So it requires that the Amazons, I don't know if Amazon is spending money on ads. I don't know if they need it, but it requires that these large companies are spending money to advertise, which in turn get in front of these audiences that are listening to podcasts. Well, if more of those companies are also feeling the burn of recession, feeling the burn of changing tides since COVID, they too have to kind of reposition how they market and their marketing dollars. Well, it's causing a ripple down effect in our industry. What this has looked like so far is Acast has laid off 15% of their workforce. That equated to about 70 people, I believe, from the data that's out there. Acast, if you're not familiar with them, they're an amazing podcast platform. And I don't know if this is the first time that they've had layoffs. But the next one is Spotify. People talk about Spotify's layoff because they look at it as in really changing up the industry. They've canceled, I think, a little bit over 50 shows. Please, if I am wrong, correct me. And they laid off about 600 people, which equates about to be 6% of their workforce. And you're probably thinking to yourself, 6%, is that it? Well, 6% is quite a bit in a new industry and in something that was growing so rapidly. If you weren't familiar, Spotify did a lot of hiring, a lot of investments. I mean, podcast providers such as Spotify, Amazon, SiriusXM, they invested hundreds of millions of dollars into podcast tech and shows. I mean, we were hearing about Spotify doing podcast deals with the Joe Rogans and all of these big names with the Obamas and so many other people for hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't foresee that coming back. I think it will in a different way, because that amount of money only for them to then go ahead and lay off 600 people as a looming recession is coming is saddening. And you're probably thinking to yourself, as an independent creator who's not looking to work in this industry, how does this impact me? For me, for example, it's impacting my clients, because I have clients who are with networks. And so shows are being cut, budgets are being taken back. And so this has a trickle down effect into how we as creators, some of our favorite shows may not be here anymore. Along with this, as you know, I'm the founder of Black Pod Festival, which is a 2-day podcast conference that's happening here in Atlanta, September 30th and October 1st. But it may not happen. The reason for this is, as we reach out to sponsors for them to bring this to life and help support this, I don't know if we'll be able to get that funding. I feel confident about it because of the fact that we have great relationships. But if we continue down this path, I don't know if we'll get that funding. And that's the piece that's concerning. As independent creators, we do kind of rely on these bigger name companies to help fund these conferences and these event spaces that we see. As a smaller conference, it's more difficult. The large conferences that are out there, they're immediately going to get that funding, but it's going to really look more of like we're going to give to the big ones, and then we may not have funding for anything else. And that's what I'm foreseeing, is that it's going to have a trickle-down effect into summits and conferences and smaller live shows and things that we've typically turned to big corporations for. But at the same token, I do think this shakeup is necessary. I don't actually think it's something that we should be afraid of, concerned about as an industry. I know people are being laid off, and that's definitely a sad situation. And I really hope that everybody's able to find their place at a new organization. But for it to be such a new industry and the way we grew in 2020 and 2021 just was not sustainable. The numbers that we were seeing, the hiring that was going on, the ad spend that was being spent, what was taking place as an industry just wasn't sustainable. And I think I would rather that this shakeup happen at this state of podcasting than for it to be 50, 60 years in and we realize that we did not build on a strong foundation. So I think this is necessary for us to restructure that level of growth around the pandemic, which is just not reality. Who wants to live through a pandemic forever? We knew that this day would come. And I think it's a matter of reimagining what podcasting could look like. And so if we're going through a recession as an economy, what does a recession for podcasting look like and mean for you? What does that mean for your platform? What does that mean for the outlets that you look out to? Because ad spends have slowed down for podcasting, but I'm sure it's slowed down in other arenas, not just podcasting. Influencer marketing is slowing down. Social media marketing is slowing down. Across the board, companies are preparing for this recession. So for us as independent creators, we need to prepare as well. If those who are influencers and creators and you solely rely on ad spend and third parties paying to really help support your platform, you really should start looking at this trend, looking at what's going on in the ad industry and what's being shifted. Does that mean you need to make a shift as a platform? Maybe. Does that mean you may actually need to start diversifying your income streams? 100%. I would be in big trouble if all I did was podcast community and podcast events right now, because those are heavily based on ad spend. Having a studio and having a space for creators allows for me to diversify that. And so my big thing to independent podcasters is, what does this industry shakeup mean for you and your show? What does this mean for your platform? What does this mean for what you're doing and bringing into the world? It's important for us to be prepared. I say, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And this is one of those calls to action for every creator. Start getting ready. Especially if you know that you want to be a full-time creator. We cannot wait by the wayside and see what the industry does. I know a lot of people who made it a goal of theirs that at the end of this year, they were leaving their full-time jobs. Is that what's best right now? I don't know. You have to understand, what does that mean for your niche and your market? So this is what I want people to start thinking about. Start paying attention. There's different newsletters that you should definitely be tuned into. like The Squeeze by Sky Pillsbury. She talks a lot about what's going on in the industry and it keeps you abreast. Pod News does a really good job of providing some of the stats and data that's out there. So, as a creator, it's important to know what's going on in your industry beyond your sphere. It's important to understand like what the shakeup is. Now I know for some people who are like, I just do this for fun. Guess what? That's perfectly fine too. But if you're a freelancer and this is what you work in, this is what you do, you have to understand how to shift with the tides because there's some things that are transferable. If you're a copywriter in podcasting, well, guess what? You can maybe transfer that skill somewhere else. And so that's even for me. This is a reminder for myself as I work with podcasts and I work in the industry full time. I have to start evaluating what are other ways that we can assure that if a full recession takes place and people cannot afford a studio, what will we do? And that's what you should ask yourself. If there's a podcast recession or a creator economy recession, what will happen? But not to be all doom and gloom, let me give you some hope at the end of this rainstorm. 2023 data says that the creator economy will hit by $300 million or something like that, maybe more. Please don't quote me on that. I'll try to find that report and make sure we link to it. But if we're already saying that the creator economy is growing and podcasting itself is what's kind of maybe dwindling, maybe incorporating that video element might be the next wave for you. If we see that YouTube is the thing, if we see that there's other creator outlets, start investigating what that means. Because if you can be a creator for a podcast, you could be a creator for YouTube. You could be a creator across the board. So think through what this looks like for you and your platform. That's really the premise of today's conversation, is understanding what an industry shakeup would mean for you as the creator and prepare yourself so that way you're ready. Hopefully you find this information helpful and can't wait till next week.